we're only recording the presentation part where Colby and I are talking about this presentation and what it is we're doing. And after that, we'll stop the recording, but we're making a recording of that for those people who are not able to attend so they can at least see that. But we didn't feel that we wanted to record everyone's questions and our answers and all that. So the recording during this part will simply be while Colby and I are talking about the presentation. Because we had so much fun doing it at Central Committee last fall, and then in January, the executive committee, Colby and I decided we would do this again and volunteered, or at least I volunteered Colby. And what I'd ask is if you would hold your questions until we finish the presentation, and then we'll be able to shut it off and I'll be able to see people whose hands are raised, etc. And with that, if we could, oh, I'm controlling this, am I not? So I can just go to the next page. Just a recap of where we are and how we got here. This is when we were looking at a new governance structure. This is actually a slide from our original presentation, though we'd also made parts of it made it into our executive committee presentation in January. We basically focused as a working group, the original working group, and now the implementation working group on the concept of a three-tiered level of governance for the organization. The governing board, which will be the legal board of the Friends General Conference, and will be focused on governance of the organization, and that's its primary mission. The Representatives Council, which will be the connector of all the communities and programs that make up FGC. And that's, we see this as a very, and we'll talk about it in more detail. This is what connects the yearly meetings and the individual meetings to FGC and FGC to them. It's a communications vehicle predominantly, but it's also what keeps the organization connected to its constituent members. And the Representatives Council will play several important roles, which we'll talk about later, including being the body that approves the members of the board and also approves any changes to bylaws or any of those sorts of things. So it's an important group. And then, of course, there's the existing standing committees, which continue to serve the role that's focusing on specific work of FGC. And the committee structure is largely unchanged from our proposal at this stage. The one thing that is different is we have segregated out the need to be, right now, if you are on a standing committee, you're a co-opted member of the Central Committee, and then you could be appointed to the Executive Committee. And so you're serving on the Executive Committee, the Central Committee, and your committee. We have separated those out. There is no need for a Representatives Council. Being on the Representatives Council, for example, does not require that you be on a standing committee, but you may choose to do so if you wish. Being on the governing board does not require that you be on a standing committee, or it certainly wouldn't likely make you a member of the Representatives Council. So these are separate functions. We think this actually frees people up to do the things they like to do and to make sure that FGC has all the resources it needs. Colby?
But we also recognize that these first half dozen slides might be a little bit of refresher for some folks who were at previous listening sessions and meetings. And so we're also going to try and emphasize some of the finesses as the implementation working group has been kind of helping to clarify things. And so one of those finesses is there might be at Central Committee some changes to standing committees that obviously impact the broader governance restructuring, but aren't directly related to it. And so like as a governance restructuring group, we're mostly focused on the governing board and the Representatives Council, but there are, as usual with an organization, there are constantly evolving and changing situations that necessitate some kind of rejiggering of standing committees. So there might still be some of that stuff on the agenda, but it's not directly tied or conditional upon the governance restructuring work. Yeah. Next slide. The
Okay,
board. I can take this one if you want.
okay.
So a little bit of refresher and just kind of the idea is there'll be a small body called the governing board that will really hold the responsibility of the organization, the fiscal responsibility, hold the kind of legally required responsibilities of a board. So it'll function more similar to what most people are probably familiar with of like a nonprofit board. And the intention here is really to have it be small so that it can be nimble, so that we can really put the effort and attention into it being diverse, and so that it can, or the members of the governing board can kind of receive the education, take the time to really know the complexities and the breadth of the organization for these challenging times that we're in, and can be able to kind of find, follow the leadings of spirit and kind of find the best path forward for FGC. And so I'm not going to read this whole list of duties of the board. It's not an all-inclusive list either. That is the kind of list and the specific wording of kind of the responsibilities of the governing board has been part of the work of the implementation group, trying to kind of finesse how exactly to word that and how to kind of align what's in the bylaws and the newly proposed bylaws with kind of how we practice things and what's in the organizational guide. And so it's generally the board that does all the nuts and bolts of keeping the organization running, um, and is going to kind of take particular attention to like the fiscal matters of the organization, so that they can really have that depth of knowledge about all the implications of that. Next slide.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
one other, this is sort of to wrap up on this, this is exactly a slide that we used in one of our previous presentations, and these are the same things that we presented to both Central Committee in our initial presentation as the working group, and also in the secondary presentation to the executive committee. So there's no real changes there. I mean, the one thing that was clear to us was that when we looked at all other Quaker organizations and all other non-for-profits, they had smaller boards and they met more frequently than than Central Committee does. You know, you can't have a large group meeting once a year and expect to actually really govern an organization. So that was the impetus for this change. But there was a more important change, which I think is on the next slide.
And and you may have heard us refer to a smaller governing board several times. And small in the context of a board can mean very different things. And so what we mean by that is 13 to 23 people. And so that's something where we actually changed this, I think, slightly from the original proposal, as we've kind of figured out what is the right number of officers and wanting to make sure that there's enough seats on the board that aren't officer roles. And so 13 to 23 is where we're at right now. And the idea is they'll meet at least 4 times a year. At least initially, they'll probably follow a similar schedule to what executive committee has been meeting. So just because that's what's been working well for us so far. But also like that's something that the board could determine for themselves as far as like if there's a lot of stuff going on, maybe they meet monthly for a while or like can really be flexible and adaptable. And that 4 is meant to be a minimum amount of how often we think the board needs to be meeting to do the work and do the work well. And everyone on the board needs to be Quaker, engaged in community with an FGC affiliated yearly or monthly meeting. But they don't need to be on the representative council. They don't need to be on FGC committees. They maybe could be, and there definitely is plenty of situations where we'll want some collaboration of that type. But the idea is that they can really focus on that governance piece of the work, and give it the attention it needs and be connected to our affiliates and who makes up FGC as an organization.
Now,
On the
the one,
board, it will be included the officers, and we have changed or kind of retitled instead of having a recording clerk and an assistant recording clerk. We've heard from the recording clerk that it very much is a two-person job and takes a team. And we were like, well, that should be represented by it being 2 recording clerks that kind of hold that piece of the work. And the officers will be for both the board, but then they'll also be the officers for the representative council. So that's another
And for
reason
FGC
why
in
it's important to
general.
have two. And for FGC in general, yes. We do still have kind of diversity goals and kind of minimums. And the idea with that is not as a quota to fill, but as something to measure ourselves against for like, are we being successful in our intentionality of being an anti-racist faith community and in our intentionality of lifting up the voices of the Quakers we want to be and the Quakers that will be around in the future. And so we kind of have built that in and are taking that very seriously as right now we're engaged in the big work of trying to create the first board. And so our intention is to bring to Central Committee this fall a slate of that initial membership of the board. And so we're trying to, yeah, find all those people and would love everyone's help in that. So that's one thing where if everyone at the end of this listening session called 1 to 3 people or asked 1 to 3 people or told us about 1 to 3 people who they thought would be a really good addition to the board of FGC, that would really help our jobs out. So,
Mm.
and we are hoping to have a few board members that bring expertise in certain skill sets. Not that everyone has on the board has to be like an expert in law, but it can be really helpful if there's like one really experienced lawyer on the board, so that when a legal issue comes up, they can bring that expertise to the table and help enhance the conversation and the discussion and decision. And then obviously for all the board members, our hope is that that person and the organization as a whole can do trainings. And like for me as treasurer, it's like I'm planning on right away with that new board doing some orientations and really helping to make sure everyone can feel confident and informed in the financial matters of the organization in their role on the board.
As a working group on implementation, we had a long discussion on that subject exactly today about how the first meeting of the board should be an orientation where this because it's smaller, we have a chance to really train the people on what their fiduciary responsibilities are, to train them about how to look at financial issues, train them to look at hard personnel issues, to talk about, what it means to be a Quaker board and so we're very, very hopeful about that. And the other so we think that with this size we can achieve that. Something that we've been trying to do as Central Committee for years and not necessarily succeeding. I think the thing that really makes this governing board different than the other smaller governing boards that meet for 3 to 4 or 5 times a year that we found at all the other Quaker organizations we looked at and also at some other not-for-profits. What makes it different is the idea that we're looking to live into our desire to be an anti-racist organization and to move FGC forward that way. And we think that these goals, if you will, about the number of the persons of color, and then frankly also we realized there were other communities in the original working group. I mean, this is what makes it different, and this is what we're really excited about. The yeah, it didn't hit me at first. I was very, when I was working on the original working group, I was very sort of technocratic. Okay, 13 to 20 people and meets this many times a year. Da, 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 da. And a couple of members of our working group put forward a plan, and it just hit me, like, okay, yeah, this is it. This is what we should do. And so here we are. And we hope you feel the same way we do. The Representatives Council. Again, we've done a number of things as you can see if you go out to our website. We have a job description for the Representatives Council. We've also put together some stuff in the organizational guide, which we delivered to you on that. We see this as a real key part of the organization, but we also see it as being smaller than the existing central committee. It's not intended as a replacement for the central committee. It's a different thing, but that is the means by which we find out as FGC what it is that's important to the Quaker organizations that are our members and what are important to the individual Quakers in the communities, in the yearly meetings, in the monthly meetings. And we expect that the representative council members are bringing forth the ideas, the needs, the concerns and desires. You notice we've highlighted those, but they're also advocates for FGC's work. And two things we pointed out here that are important, the representative, and I mentioned earlier, they appoint the officers and the governing board members. Those are appointed by the representatives council, so they're controlling who's looking after the organization. Um, and they also approve changes to the bylaws, so nothing changed
Mhm.
dramatically without the approval of the representatives council. And we're also looking for the representatives council approving the mission, vision, and priorities of the FGC and for seasoning major issues. And so they're saying here to the board, here's what we're looking for you to do. Colby, any comments on this or?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would just want to add that this role and the representative council, like, it's such a critical one of like kind of the checks and balances and the making sure that FGC stays accountable to its members, but then also by having that smaller board actually do the nuts and bolts of the day-to-day work, being able to be more nimble for that. And so like trying to find that right balance. And we think we've gotten a good spot there, but that's all something that like obviously can change. And we see this as a step in the right direction of governance for FGC and not the perfect solution that's going to address everything everywhere. And so it really is about like having that larger body that really brings forth and represents their yearly meetings. Right now, I know in my yearly meeting, it's like, oh, I'm appointed by my yearly meeting, but like I haven't gotten that intentionality or that expression of like, oh, I'm supposed to represent my yearly meeting. And so really trying to be that thing where like the reps that are on the representative council need to be engaging with their yearly meetings, engaging with FGC in a really active way to bring those two communities together so we can be one large faith community.
Again, this is a smaller group than the existing, and I'm not thinking of this as a plug and play, this steps in place of the central committee, but if you're thinking about that, this is a much smaller group, 48 to 72 members. And they'll have at least one in-person hybrid meeting at least once a year, and there'll be probably some other Zoom meetings. We envision one of the things that we'd like to see is sort of regular Zoom meetings on sort of updates on how things are going, or hey, here's an initiative and we need your help, or we need your feedback. So here are the key differences from existing governance structure. Each affiliated yearly meeting will appoint two members of the council, not different numbers for different yearly meetings. It'll be two for each yearly meeting. And then the affiliated monthly meetings, which right now are appointing one in total, will collectively appoint two members to the council. We envision them getting together, caucusing, led by the clerk of FGC, and then they will appoint two members to represent them. And then further, to support diversifying the council, we envision additional members being appointed by the following groups: Ministry on Racism, they may appoint up to 10, the Adult Young Friends up to 5, Young Friends up to 3, and this would be the only place that the Young Friends would actually be directly involved in the governance other than in the committee structure, because Pennsylvania is one of 5 states that explicitly prohibits people under 18 years old serving on the board of a not-for-profit. And FGC is a Pennsylvania incorporated not-for-profit, so they can't be on the Young Friends can't be on the governing board, but they can be on the Representatives Council. And also from the Friends for Lesbian, Gay, Bi, Trans, Queer Concerns, up to 5. And additionally, the clerks of each of the standing committee or their designee will be members of the Representatives Council. And we want to be very clear that FGC staff, though they work with and attend Representatives Council, they may not serve as members of the council. So there you have the composition of the council. Anything you want to say on that, Colby?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, as I hope is clear through this presentation and kind of what we're presenting as the plan, the living into anti-racism and our diversity work was really central to like how can we do this restructure in a way that enhances that. And so while we have these kind of separate groups appointing folks, we see that as a band-aid, as a way to help move us there. And the idea and the goal and the vision for the future is we get to a point where the yearly meetings and the monthly meetings are appointing enough people of a diverse background and life that that doesn't become necessary even. And so that's one of those things where like maybe in that ideal future where we do have this amazingly diverse council, we won't need to have these designated seats. But in the interim, this felt like a really good way to make sure there's at least some voices that have previously not been very included or as included as should be in
Yeah,
the council
I
composition.
mean, one of the things I think that's really important is this governance structure, like any other governance structure, is not intended to be permanent. Times will change, the organization will change, and the governance structure will change as the organization changes and the needs change. Um, and as Colby mentioned, we 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 see and hope for the day where the diversity requirements won't be required because we meet them just automatically as part of as the structure of our faith community.
Now we'll very briefly talk about the standing committees. I hope folks can't hear the downpour that's just happening on my roof too badly. Oh, good. So, Paul already talked a little bit about standing committees, but I mean, personally, in my mind, like standing committees have always been and will continue to be the heart and soul of FGC. And this governance structure, well, it takes standing committees and separates them from what is currently central committee and the governance role that that plays. Um, it doesn't reduce their value at all. If anything, it gives them more capability to adapt and be flexible to our changing world. And we hope and fully expect that it'll also open up a lot more ways for people to volunteer and be on committees for FGC when there isn't also that requirement of being a part of governance. And so obviously the committees will need to be collaborating with and working alongside the governing board and the representatives council. And so that's why we have committee clerks or their designee being serving on the representative council. And for some committees, more of the what previously been referred to as the administrative committees, we've talked about kind of having governing at least one member from the governing board on those committees to just make sure those conduits are open, make sure communication is happening. But this way, the standing committees can do their work and do their work well in collaboration with the governing board with a little bit less of the siloing and the kind of micromanaging and the trying to figure out how to get stuff done that we've been struggling with over the last few years. And then the most exciting part now is now we get to figure out how do we transition to this. So that's now you've heard what we are proposing has been to be changed. And next step is like, well, what is it going to take to actually put that into practice? And that's been this new working group's work. So take it away, Paul.
So one of the first things we realized we had to do, I mean, and we've done a number of things. Obviously, you've seen some of them we posted out on the website, the job descriptions, et cetera, and the things that we just sent out to you on the organizational guide. We realized that we needed a complete change to the bylaws. In part because the bylaws said the central committee was the governing body. And that, the executive role, it described the executive committee, so we had to change all of that. We have come up with a proposed change, again, staying fairly light touch on the parts that aren't affected by the creation of the two groups and trying to keep them relatively simple. They are being reviewed by outside legal counsel, and the first meeting with legal counsel and members from the working group takes place tomorrow afternoon. And so we will be working with them to see that everything's okay. And as soon as we get a revised copy reviewed that's okay by them and okayed by our committee, which we don't imagine will be more than a week or two out or so, we will get that out to all the central committee members so they can review it prior to us asking them to discern on this in the October FGA Central Committee meeting.
This is
Again,
also a great opportunity to plug the website, which has right across the top navigation bar a link to kind of governance reform and is where we're putting a bunch of information, and we'll add things like the bylaws or the draft bylaws once they've been through the legal vetting.
And as soon as we're finished with these listening sessions, we'll also get the organizational guide stuff that we've sent out to you will be out there as well. So there's a bunch of stuff going on. Okay, there'll also be changes, as I indicated, the organizational guide. We sent you um, the the sections that we thought were important to note. Two sections obviously will need to be removed. There's a whole section describes the central committee and their role, and where he envisioned laying down the central committee. And there's a section that on the executive committee, and we envision laying that down as well. So we don't think those sections will be needed. There will need to be a section describing the representatives council, and we did send out the current version of that to you to review before this meeting in a PDF format. And there is a new section on the governing board, and we sent that out to you as well. That describe in a little more detail than you'd see in a bylaws, which tend to be sort of more high level, the role of these two bodies. We did change two sections to make them consistent with the new structure. That's the section on officers and the section on staff, and we sent those to you as well. The officers, the big change there would be as Colby's already talked about, the creation of the two co-recording clerks as opposed to a recording clerk and assistant recording clerk. And all other areas of the organizational guide are basically being lightly revised. And basically, primarily, we're replacing references to central committee and executive committee, and is putting in place representatives, council, or governing board as appropriate. I mean, there are some minor changes in between, and we couldn't resist one or two grammatical changes while we were at it, just passing through. It's hard to pass up a grammatical error and not correct it. And I think we also made a couple of changes that may have had a gender reference, and so we wanted to
Yeah.
take that out as long as we're in there. But other than that, relatively little in the other than what you've seen, there's relatively little change in the organization guide.
And that's where like I want to remind folks that the organizational guide is a living document, and we have a whole committee tasked with kind of keeping it updated. And so as a working group, as an implementation working group, we've mostly been focusing on the substantive changes and the changes that will best frame this new structure. And then obviously the things will have to be nudged, and maybe the wording wasn't quite right and it'll be adjusted in a couple years, but we wanted to at least get a start down for kind of our consideration in October.
And so what's our plan for implementation? And yeah, because we spent a lot of time talking about this, because you need to do it in such a way that you don't, change the bylaws and oops, okay, as soon as we change the bylaws, if we change them without having some other condition on the change, then the executive committee, the central committee would cease to exist, and who's going to approve the board? And so basically what we see the steps is we're going to bring to the central committee meeting is first to approve or reappoint officers as required in the normal course of business. So for example, I think we're being asked to appoint a rising presiding clerk. And so that would be in the normal course of business for the central committee. So we're going to do that. I think we're going to need another recording clerk, as if I recall, Matilda rotates off. So that would another be, so those would just be the same kind of things that we would do ordinarily in the normal course of business. The second step would be to approve the changes to the bylaws to be effective upon the latter of the end of the 225 Central Committee meeting or the appointment of the new governing board. And so whichever comes later will be the event that triggers the creation, all of these events will have triggering wording in their minutes when we present them to the Central Committee. The same would be to approve the proposed changes to the organizational guide. Again, they would also be subject to the same sort of triggering language that, and then approve the slate of members for the governing board for the recommended original terms. And by that, we intend to take the original board and divide it into people who are appointed for 1 year, for 2 years, and for 3 years, so that we only have a third of the board rotating off in any given year. They will, of course, be eligible for a um, a 3 year term at the end of their, an additional 3 year term if they desire to serve, and if the representative council approves them. And then we further would ask for, and again, this would be conditional upon all of these events happening, and then finally approve laying down the central and executive committee subject to the implementation of the new board. And if we achieve all of those things in the central committee meeting, then at the end of the central committee, that would be the end of the central and executive committee. We would have the new bylaws, the new organizational guide, and a new board of directors.
And so that's the specific wording of like those kind of actions and stuff. I think we'll work on some drafts and some examples that we'll bring to the executive committee and central committee to help facilitate that process. But this, we hope, gives you the intentionality behind, if not the exact words, as far as like how we see the technicalities of making that change happen. And then
and
especially for you all as central committee members, we also wanted to provide some clarity on like, well, how does this affect me? I'm currently on the central committee. Where do I fit in the new process? And so that's where we're envisioning officers, no real change. We're just kind of changing the work and kind of which bodies the officers work within, but the same officers would continue in those roles for the remainder of their terms, and then kind of go through that same process as we have been in the past. Anyone who's co-opted members of Central Committee, which if you're not familiar with that, some members of Central Committee are appointed by their yearly meetings and some are co-opted by FGC through the nominating committee process to serve on a specific committee, standing committee, or serve in a particular role. And so our plan that we're proposing is that everyone who's co-opted will just continue in that role the reason we co-opted them in the first place. They just will no longer be on a governing body, and so they won't be on the representatives council. They will just be able to focus solely on their committee work. And then for everyone who's appointed by their yearly meetings to the representative or to this current central committee, to ease in the transition, we're proposing to kind of offer folks, and we're already starting to engage in communications with central committee members, to either serve on the new representative council in that kind of representative council role, which we have a job description on the website for, or pretty much everyone on central committee also has a standing committee they serve on. And so maybe a member might actually want to just focus on that standing committee work. And so they can shift their focus to that and not serve on the representative council moving forward. But our intention is not to force anyone out who is currently on central committee from serving on the new representatives council. And we have actually looked at kind of, well, what is the term rotation of where folks are at to kind of make sure that there won't be too many people hanging around and that disrupting the kind of shrinking that we're intending to happen by this creation of the representative council. And for most yearly meetings, that will not really be a concern by looking at the current slate of folks on Central Committee. There's 2 yearly meetings that have a large number of people currently on Central Committee. And so for those yearly meetings, we'll just engage in a more direct conversation with them as far as like, oh, like who of your current members like really want that representative council role, and how many of them could be convinced to just do that standing committee work. But even if there are more than 2 from a yearly meeting for a few years, the idea is we just kind of wouldn't reappoint folks once their term expires until it gets down to that 2 per yearly meeting. And it wouldn't go for more than 2 or 3 years based on the records we have.
But we don't see that it's not, it's a lot of major number of people. There are a large number of co-opted people. There are, but we didn't want to push anybody out. Look, you agreed to serve as your yearly meetings representative, for 3 years, and you've 1 year into it and you want to do the 2 years. Well, then you can do the 2 years, even if you're not one of the two representatives from yearly meetings. You can finish out your term and we'll move on from there.
Mhm.
And that's it.
So that's that. So now we can, yeah, stop the recording, and then if folks have questions, comments, concerns, I think probably would be most